Leah's here. Thank you, Leah and Josh, for hosting, opening up your home. Thank you, Josh, for the scheduling this on the night of the 7th game of the World Series. Tonight we're here for a very important topic, and that's you all know, which is why you're here. And we're very excited that Tracy Kite has agreed to present once again, and Tracy is here together on behalf of JCFS, and we have a very close partnership with JCFS for many, many years at Hillel Torah, a very important community organization that has helped us. This is your job, but I'm going to do it for you, which has helped us do some tremendous things at school in terms of student safety and wellness and all sorts of social emotional programming for children, the really young age as well as middle school of all types. And it's great to, as a school, be able to have a place to turn in our Jewish community for this kind of expertise and this kind of programming. And they also provide excellent parent programs. So Tracy actually presented last year to our middle school parents as part of something called PIP, Partners in Prevention, which is a new addiction prevention program that we started to implement last year in our middle school in 7th grade. I don't remember if it's 6th or 7th it starts. I think maybe 7th and 8th. And we had a parent night associated with that, which was really excellent. And we're really happy to have Tracy back to present on this topic, which is something we all think about, we're all dealing with. Different ages I see represented in the room, and we're going to explore this together, and we'll see how this arrangement works out, and maybe we'll shift it around if we need to in the middle. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for coming out in this lovely October Chicago weather. So I'm curious, how many people were at the school last year when I did Tweens, Drugs, and Parenting? So 2 of you. Okay. So there'll be a couple of things that are completely familiar, like, oh, I've seen this before. And then there will probably be a bunch that you say, oh, wait, this theme is returned. So just so people know. So I work for JCFS Chicago. We are a social service agency. We had a lovely introduction by Rabbi. There he is.
I also want to I forgot to thank the PTA. Thank you to the PTA for partnering with us on this program and on so many other things and arranging the hosting.
Yes. So what we're going to talk about tonight is technology and social media, which is, I read a quote the other day that talked about the fact that we are just this enormous experiment. Right? There's no control group. We are just the experiment. And it's our generation, it's the generation of kids we're raising. That's just kind of where we are. And so we do the best that we can with the information that we gather. And so I always like to say that part of my job is I get to read the parenting books that not everybody has time to read, and then I can synthesize them and give you information about them. I have to say that while there are books on this, I get far more online on this topic because it can come faster. And in fact, I have a handout that we're going to look at very briefly that literally hit my inbox this morning. And I sort of added it to the large collection of handouts. So I want to just do a little check-in because I understand that we have parents of kids of a variety of ages. So I just want to get a sense as we're kind of going through. Yes. Okay. So who has kids sort of K through 2? Okay, so lots of you. 3 through 5? Lots of you. 6 through 8? A few of you. Okay, high school? A few. Okay. All right, so there's a little bit of everything. And I have, usually when I do this, it's more targeted at middle school. So I've woven in some other material that I'm hoping will be helpful for those of you who are also dealing with your younger kids. Of course, if you have older kids and younger kids, that's a whole different issue because the younger kids, of course, have to be older. Okay, so I've given you a whole bunch of materials. I'm going to walk through them really quickly just because I won't talk about all of them. One is the outline. I go back and forth about whether I should give you, this is like more than I'm even going to talk about, but in theory it means that you don't really need to write anything down because it's all here. Parenting is a journey. This little roadmap we're going to go through rather quickly. Those of you who were here or who heard me a year ago, this is the piece that you will have seen before. It might not have been purple, who knows. Common sense census, media use by teens and tweens. This is what hit my box this morning. There is a much more in-depth, this is actually the executive summary of the research. The whole research was 78 pages, and I chose not to print that even one copy. But there's some really interesting stats in here on use, and who's using, and when are they using, and things like that. I put together this handy-dandy sort of checklist on what to think about when your kid is asking for or when you are thinking about a cell phone and then different social medias. We're going to talk a little bit about family phone contracts, right? Because we want to be doing these things in communication and in conversation. This, what teens wish their parents knew about social media, is actually one of my very favorite pieces. So for those of you with little kids, if you want, you can skip reading it, although I think it's really, really nicely done. And for those of you with anybody from, I would say, 4th to 5th on up, you will find this really relevant. And then there's the evaluation, and that's all the paper. There are a bunch of resources at the back of the outline, so both what I used in putting this together and also just kind of my go-tos. So like if a topic comes up, there are certain places that I just go automatically because I know that I can trust their information. So it's all sort of in there. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is a listening exercise. So for those few of you who are here with a spouse, I recommend that you not do this with your spouse. If you are sitting next to your absolute best friend, I recommend that you not do this with your best friend. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to pair up with another person, and you're going to have about 1.5 minutes, and you're going to tell them some story about your challenge, concern, whatever, around technology or social media and your kids. Right? Because I don't know about you, but I could go back 24 hours and I always have something, some argument, some concern. The person who is listening to the story will do just that. You will listen. You will not speak. You may smile, you may nod, you may shrug. If your vocal cords are screaming to be heard, you can have a mm-hmm. Right? But beyond that, I want you to focus on listening. You have about 1.5 minutes. My trusty technology will ring, and then you'll switch, and the listener will become the speaker, and the speaker will become the listener. Does that make sense for everybody? Mm-hmm. Okay, find a partner and tell your story. All right, if you have not switched speakers, please do so. So, and I asked people what it was like to tell the story without being verbally responded to.
Awkward.
Awkward. Anything else about that, or just awkward?
Yeah, well, when you're talking and someone just like looking at you and not responding at all, it's a little awkward.
Okay. Okay. So did you feel like she wasn't listening?
No, I could tell she was listening.
Okay. Okay. It just wasn't. It wasn't the rhythm that you were used to.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And a lot of people have that, or some people I should say, have that reaction. Anybody else?
I couldn't listen to her without saying things. I was like, it was so hard. I wanted to just tell her that I agreed with her.
And I was the opposite. I wanted Amy to tell me that she agreed with me. And I told her I wanted you to talk. But
Okay.
She couldn't.
Okay.
I felt it's okay that because I knew she wasn't allowed to talk, so I knew that was the rule. Like
Okay.
I wasn't expecting.
Okay. So it didn't feel like you didn't think that there was anything subterranean, any like weird thing going on about it.
Because we were making eye contact, which I don't know if that's where you're going, but
It's one of the places. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So what was it like? So a couple people have said it was really hard to listen without speaking. Anybody else? Sometimes people. Yes.
So I happen to be like just literally last week attended a Gym Night conference, and he does all about he's like teacher coaching and how to actually listen and have productive conversations. So the funny thing is, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, Gym Night's in the room.
I just am dressed in different clothing, that's all. So yes, I actually think that a more expanded version of empathetic listening, it should be taught like in junior high and high school and college and all of those things. So why why would we do this here? Like, why is this part of a parenting conversation?
Just to the point of eye contact, I sort of wondered if when you're asking, you're getting at that, like, a lot of times our kids are talking to us, or even at work, like, you just, in any conversation that you have with people, they're just sitting there doing this while you're talking to them, and it's, I just sort of slow down and stop talking sometimes when people do that. I hate it, but I know sometimes my kids are talking to me when I'm in the middle of something, and I don't necessarily just put it right down and they pay attention to me.
There's actually a word for that. When people are on their phone when you're talking to them, it's called phubbing. Phubbing, which is a weird word, but it's, is it? Right. Yeah, So the reason that I think that this is really important as a parent is that we tend to spend a lot of time telling our kids what to do, when to do it, how to do it, where to do it, with what tone of voice they should do it, et cetera, et cetera. And it turns out that what our kids really need from us is for us to listen. And more often than not, they need for us to listen without giving them the solution. And how annoying is that? Right? And that takes time. Right? Like, who felt like that was really, really long? That you were either talking or listening? Okay, under 2 minutes. That's how unaccustomed we are these days to sitting and being with other people. So it's just something that it's something I want you to hold in your head. I'm going to move over to this purple piece of paper right now. This parenting is a journey, what do you need to have? Yeah, there's some extra packets by the door if anybody came in and did not grab one. A couple of years ago, a bunch of my colleagues and I, all who do parent programs in the community, got together to talk about what is it that we always include in our programming. Like, what are the things that, if we don't talk about these things, we don't feel like we have well represented ourselves as mental health professionals in the community. And we must have had 4 or 5 meetings, really like drilling down, because it was really important to us and we felt passionately about it. And so we came up with these 5 sort of categories. And then this is my version of creativity, is clip art. So I created this lovely little piece of paper, and I use it to sort of, I can now go through them and I can tell you what they are. And some of them will end up going into more depth in the program, and some of them we might not. It just, every program is kind of different. So the first one is boundaries. And this is the old parents are in charge, and their job is to teach their kids not be friends with them. So some of you may have heard me talk about sort of brain development. It's one of the things that I find really fascinating. And one of the things that we know now is that kids' brains develop slowly, right? And it turns out apparently they're developing more and more slowly, which is very frightening to me. And so what I like to say is that the part of your brain that develops last is the prefrontal cortex, which is right here. And it's the part that reasons things out and thinks ahead, like consequences, what will happen if I do this, et cetera, et cetera. It's the last part to develop. Now, it doesn't mean it's not developed at all early on, right? But your brain kind of goes through 2 phases of development. So it's, fetus up to, I can't remember when it sort of slows down, like 6, I think. There's tons and tons of development. And then it slows down for a while. And then it goes through this huge other pattern later on where there's a lot of pruning and a lot more growth in the teen years. And this part doesn't finish developing until you're about 25. Right? So one of the things that I like to think about in terms of boundaries is that kids can't think forward to understand why the thing that they think is an outstanding idea is not an outstanding idea. Right? And so it's our job to be that sort of, those breaks. Like this is, we can start with this is why it's not a good idea, and then eventually we get to, you don't have to know the reason, but this is not a good idea, and it's not okay for you to do. So that's a part of that. The other piece that I'd like to talk about is that kids are different that we are different from our kids are different from us. We are all separate people on our own individual journeys. And it can be really tricky to separate that out, especially as they're coming out of being really, really tiny, or if it's the kid who like looks just like you or looks just like their spouse. But to remember that everybody's different and everybody has different journeys. We are mental health professionals, and so we have a goal of raising competent, resilient kids. Different parents have different goals, and that's fine. What's really important is that you know what your goal is or what your goals are, and that you use those goals when you make decisions about what's going to go on with your kids. Do a whole separate session about that. But the other piece in here is that we need to allow kids to be good enough and not the best. None of us are the best at everything we do. Right? Some things we might be really good at, and some things we might be really mediocre at. And that's okay, and we learn to be more okay with that. Well, I'm learning. I'm a recovering perfectionist. So kids are the same way, and we need to help kids understand that and be okay with that. And so this leads into my very favorite topic, which is good enough parenting. Nobody teaches you how to do this, and even if you think you figured it out because of your first kid, then you get your second kid who's nothing like your first kid, and none of the things that you used or learned from your first kid are useful with your second kid, or maybe your third, or like whatever it is. So good enough parenting is what we're aiming for. Not perfect parenting, because it doesn't exist. Thank goodness. So there are pieces around that, around self-compassion, which is really, really important work. And if self-compassion is a challenge for you, grab me afterwards, and I'll turn you on to my friend Kristen Neff, who does all this amazing work on self-compassion. And the other thing is that I always try to remember that the way I deal with my own mess-ups is how my kids are seeing you deal with mess-ups, right? So, when I spill something all over the floor, I can berate myself, and then that teaches my kids that that's what you do. Or I can be like, oh man, that was not a good move, and can somebody give me a hand and let's get this cleaned up, right? So it's how we handle those things and see them as modeling. The fourth is understanding normal development. And my colleague Anne always says, make sure you tell them when you do talk about this that normal development is a range. So it's a range. And beyond it being a range, right? Like, so if I took all the fourth graders at Hillel Torah, the level of maturity and capacity and all sorts of things would be all over the place. And that's sort of your average kids, right? And then you have your kids who have special issues. So like one of the things we know is that kids with ADHD can be up to 3 years behind in maturation, right? So I have to say that one of my kids has ADHD and she's 10, and I love the fact that she's immature, right? Because it's kind of useful. She's not into all the things that other 10, almost 11-year-olds are into, so there's advantages to everything. But we need to understand what's normal and what's not about our kids. Again, easier sometimes with your later kids because you sort of watch the whole pattern. And the last piece is listening skills. Everybody wants to be heard. And the more we can practice that, the better off we are. Okay, I'm done with this. I'm moving back to the outline. So, why is technology so hard? I read recently that the people who invented the internet thought it was this most amazing thing, and it is. And nobody had any idea what the effects were going to be and what was going to happen. Now, some people have now figured out the effects and are trying to monetize that. And so one of the things that we need to understand is that social media's goal is to get our attention. There's a podcast I listen to called Your Undivided Attention, right? Because that's the goal of all social media, is to get and hold your attention. It's very powerful. It's very strong. So, when you can't get the kid off the electronics, to have some compassion for that kid and for yourself, because you're up against this entire world that is trying to get your kids in your attention, right? So again, some compassion in there, and then understanding that your kid, there's no way with their underdeveloped prefrontal cortex that your kid is going to be able to withstand those temptations. It's not a realistic ask. It's never stopped me from asking, but it's not a realistic ask. As kids get older, the concept of FOMO. Are you familiar with the idea of FOMO? Fear of missing out, right? It used to be that missing out was who didn't get to go to the party or the after-school activity or whatever it is now. But you didn't know that till you went to school the next day. Now, you know everything that people are doing all the time. People are having conversations all the time. And if you're not in that chat, you're not in that conversation. And so that fear of missing out is a huge driver. Because remember, particularly as we go from sort of that middle grade, sort of like, third, fourth, fifth, and we're going into sort of middle school, developmentally, they're starting to separate from their parents. This is what they're supposed to do, guys. It's good. And they're starting to build stronger relationships with their peers, right? This is what the brain is doing. They're getting prepared to have a significant other. It's all the way it's supposed to be. But if those are the people you need to connect to and they're connecting all the time, then you want to be there. Because otherwise, you're afraid that you're going to miss out. So that's some of that if you've got particularly high schoolers. And they're like looking all the time. That's why. Because stuff is happening and they don't want to miss it. Another piece is that electronics act like a stimulant. So when you look at your electronics, much worse when it's in color. Anybody know how to do grayscale on their Apple devices? So if I turn on my phone and I triple click it, I get what's called grayscale. I gotta tell you, it is a lot less interesting, right? So when I think that I really only use my phone because I need it, when I grayscale it, I'm not really all that interested in using it. And it turns out it's not triggering the same things in my brain, right? So your brain gets a feel-good shot when you look at electronics, right? And brains like that, yeah.
Do you know if Androids do that as well?
I believe that they do. I don't know how to do it.
It's
But
not
if you,
triple click. That's my camera.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's probably an accessibility feature that you have to turn on.
it may be, yeah, I may have turned this on. I can't remember. But if you Google it, yeah, I'm pretty sure that they all do it. Yeah.
Really?
Okay. Another piece of electronics. Okay, so now I'm going to ask everybody to put their electronics down and away. So here's another fun fact. If my phone is on the table, we will all have 25% less attention with each other. If I put my phone in my purse, we will have much fuller attention. So I've started like in programs that I'm doing with professionals, asking everyone to please put your phone in your purse. And it's amazing what a difference it makes. The blue light emitted from electronic devices tells your brain that it's still daytime. Right? So if any of you have kids who have trouble sleeping at night, start taking away the electronics earlier until you find that distance between electronics and sleep that they need. If you've got kids with ADHD, it's longer than they're going to want it to be. And that's just what it is. There's nothing to be done about that. That's just how their brains work. And of course, technology is also hard because it changes so fast. And we can't keep up. All right. However, as Rabbi and I were speaking about just a little bit ago, growing up is still growing up. And kids are still kids. And who you were in your experiences as a tween and a teen and all of those things, it's really not that different, right? It's just that we used to do things on the phone, and now you do things on a device. But the things you do have not changed, right? So socializing with peers, kids socialize, that's what social media apps started out as. Now they can be used for lots of other things. But that's what they started out as ways to connect. And the vast majority of kids connect with people that they know, and it's the way that they maintain those relationships. So I'm not saying that there aren't dangers in connecting on social media, and I'm not saying that we absolutely need to talk to our kids about that, and we're going to get there. But mostly, kids use it to connect, right? And they explore personal interests. Now, I've yet to understand the personal fascination with cats and dogs on some of these sites. And maybe it's just because I'm not a huge pet person. But really, right, like people have always explored what they're interested in, and now they explore it online. Who used to love to go to the mall when you were in middle school? Who might still love to go to the mall, right? And who might spend a little more time than is healthy on Zappo or Amazon or any of those places, right? Same activity, different space. Listening to music, only now you can have way more music, right? And you can just listen to the song you want. You don't even have to find it in the middle of the album or the tape or the whatever it is. Doing schoolwork, a lot of schoolwork is now being done online, right? And there are pros and cons to that. And it's probably, the pros and cons might be different for different kids. And then watching movies or TV, right? So a huge portion of what younger kids are doing is watching videos, including TV shows on YouTube, right? Like that's a huge part. I have 10-year-old twins, and my son, there seems to be no show that he has not discovered on YouTube. So one of the advantages that I really like is for kids who are atypical in their setting. It is a really wonderful way for them to connect with other people who are like them. And that's a huge thing. So technology can increase isolation, right? Because if you're already feeling left out and now you're out of everything else and now you're seeing everybody else is doing all this stuff, it absolutely can increase your sense of isolation. It can decrease your sense of isolation if nobody around you is like you, but you find other people online who are like you and you realize that I'm not really all alone. They just don't happen to be in my school or my church or like wherever they are. Okay. So we talked about kids lacking the brain maturity to make reasoned decisions. So for teens, I just heard this wonderful analogy that they have, their brains are like a Ferrari and their brakes are like a bicycle, right? And that's their inability. And so this woman I heard last week talked about the job of parents, right? The first one is to love our kids when we're not ready to kill them. And the second is to act as their prefrontal cortex until they have their own. But the third is to help them build their prefrontal cortex, right? It's a muscle. We don't build muscle unless we use it. So kids have to have opportunities to figure out what the boundaries are and when to stop and all of those things. Okay, so social media's impact on growing up. So it affects everything, literally. Identity is a huge piece. So never feeling enough, right, which I'm pretty sure is the entire middle school experience, if I remember correctly, is amplified on social media. Now, the issue is that as adults, we experience the same thing. Anybody else ever go on Facebook and see other people's perfect lives while you're sitting in your own messy house with like you haven't finished the laundry, right? Because people curate their identity online, right? Most of us probably do it. What pictures do you put? Do you put the picture of the table that nobody's cleaned up? No, you put the picture of everybody's all dressed and looking really good, right? You took 20 of them until you could get the picture that looks really, really great. And that's what happens. And then that's what we're comparing ourselves against. And that's what kids are doing. And even though some part of their brain understands that, right? So kids take 100 and some photos for every one that they post online. Right? That's an enormous amount of time. We must have some amazing budding photographers in the world. So they know that there are lots of bad photos that don't get posted. But still, what we do is we compare our icky insides to those beautiful outsides. And it leaves you feeling much less than. On the other hand, you get to experiment with lots of different things. Right? You can have different hairstyles and you can put them out there and see what happens. You can try different clothes and see what happens. Videos and photos are the way tweens and teens express and distinguish themselves, right? It used to be that it was the socks you wore, not anymore. Now it's the photos and the filters and all sorts of things. It's this image that people create of themselves. Again, pros and cons to that. It depends on if it's everything or if it's a small space. So socialization, peer acceptance it's the thing we all worry about, right? Is that person like me? Did they not? Who's saying hello to me, et cetera, et cetera. Only now it's quantified. Now you put something out there and you can find out literally by how many likes you have how well you did, how people like your hair or your clothes or anything like that. So it's everything is like magnified in a way that's really, really hard. Fear of missing out, we talked about. Selfies. So it's interesting, what I write in here, what I copied in here, I don't write any of this, is perfect selfies of amplified body images for girls. It's done it for boys too, right? So boys now think that, the six-pack abs are the thing that you're supposed to have. A lot of kids now, because what you can do is that you can now Photoshop yourself, right? So you can make your image look like whatever it is that you want. And apparently, doctors who fix noses and plastic surgeons, thank you, it's late. Plastic surgeons are now getting requests from people, not like bringing in a magazine, but bringing in a picture of themselves that they photoshopped and say, make me look like this. Right? So, yeah, so your perception and vision of yourself can get a little messy. A lot of what kids are doing online is figuring out what they can post and then looking to see what kind of response it got, right? And what we might think of is, oh wow, you got 100 responses. That may not be anywhere near what they're expecting. So for them, 100 responses is horrible, right? And their whole day might go down. But you won't know until you ask them and you talk to them about it and you listen. Okay, so one of the problems, of course, is that then it's all focused on the outward and it's not focused on the inward. So some of these problems are kind of obvious. Self-regulation, I've talked some about. And one of the challenges, too, is like kids are doing a lot of schoolwork online. Well, okay, so if I'm online doing schoolwork and then it's dinging because I'm getting other sorts of things, how do I manage that? Right? Anybody else have trouble at work? I finally had to turn off most of my notifications because I can't get anything done if every time a new email comes in, it dings and it pops up, and right? That's the problem that kids have. I have a prefrontal cortex. I eventually figured out that that's a problem and eventually figured out that there's a way that I can adapt my computer to make it better. There's a lot of steps that I had to take. It probably took me 4 to 6 months to figure all that stuff out. Kids don't know that. They don't know how to figure that out. So we need to help them. Kids are getting better at it. It's really interesting to talk, especially sometimes to high schoolers, about like what are they doing and how do they manage this, because they recognize that it's hard and that it doesn't serve them well. And there are apps that you can use and there's all sorts of stuff. 57% of all teens agree that using social media distracts them when they should be doing homework. 50% of teens report feeling addicted to their mobile devices. This is not clinical addiction. They're working on a definition of clinical addiction. But this is, their devices become more important than other things. That's kind of how I describe addiction to kids in general.
Same as adults.
I'm sorry?
Same as adults.
Same as adults, right.
I mean,
Yeah, right. I'm going to tell you that if I'm tired and my kids are crabby, it's much easier to be on an electronic device than it is to be dealing with a crabby kid. It's just the reality.
but it also seems to be like, I was just saying, I was on a flight yesterday, just looking around.
Yes.
People don't want to be bored. People don't want to just be thinking
Correct.
or drifting off.
Yes.
It has to be a device.
Yes.
If I've got nothing to do, it's got to be a device.
Yes. And that's and thank you for bringing that up right in this moment, because that's perfect, because there's a lot of that just daydreaming that is how we develop ideas and thoughts and self-regulation and self-identity and all of those things. And if you always have a device with you, then you're not going to do that because you don't have that. But the world doesn't offer, I don't know about you, but we used to be in long, boring car rides, right? And there was really nothing much to do. You had some games and you had music, but mostly it was like looking out the window and just letting your day or week, whatever, flow through your brain. There are no such thing as long, boring car rides now, right? Like there are kids who get in the car and want the video as soon as they get in the car because heaven forbid it's 10 minutes. right? And so they're losing that. And those are, in some ways, that's the gift of Shabbat, right? Is that there are automatic boundaries around no technology for this period of time. It may bring some crabbiness, but it does have some advantages, particularly around this. So it turns out that we think we're good role models for our children, and they do not agree. 2/3 of kids think their parents are on their devices too much. 38% of teens feel their parent is addicted to their mobile device, which is a 10% increase since 2016. Yeah. So this is the old, when your kid is talking to you, put the phone down. And this is my personal motivation on this issue. I want to listen to them now so that they will talk to me when they're 16 and 18, right? And so it's like this is my deposit. My deposit for you talking to me later is I'm going to put this thing down now. Because I have a prefrontal cortex and I can make those decisions. But it's really, really hard. So this second bullet is a couple of years old, so I don't know whether it's still accurate. Adults check smartphones an average of once every 6 minutes. That's a lot, right? And you can know now, especially on your Apple phone, like screen time will tell you all sorts of things about how you're using your phone. And Androids have some similar things, I just am not as familiar with them. Parents post nearly 1,000 images of their children before the child is 2. So basically, our kids have digital footprints before they can talk, right? And so one of the things that I always challenge parents on is, do you ask your kids before you post photos of them? It's their image. Do you ask them? Right? Because over time, we want them to think about what they do before they post an image and how they make those decisions. Okay. So when I think about this topic overall, I look at it as a series of decisions that we as parents get/have to make. Right? So the first one is, when do I allow my kids to have any kind of electronic device? Right? My parents gave my kids iPads when they were 3. They thought it was a great idea. Honestly, my husband had just died. Anything that was keeping the kids occupied, I was okay with. But, most kids, 3-year-olds, I remember my 3-year-olds teaching my friend who didn't have electronics yet how to work the iPad, right? Because these kids will never know a time without electronics. So the first thing that we have to make decisions about is, when do they get electronics? When do they have access to electronics, right? Like maybe you have an iPad or some sort of a tablet that the kids share. Well, when do they get to use it? When do they not? Those are all choices that we make. Then we get to when do they have their own phone, right? And I would layer on that, what kind of phone, right? Because there really are still phones that are not smartphones. And in fact, there is a movement called Wait Until 8th. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. The idea is that communities of parents can gather and agree that until 8th grade, they will not give their kids smartphones. Doesn't mean they won't necessarily give their kids phones, right? Because you can still buy flip phones. You can still call your kids. They can text. It's the starter phone. But again, those are all decisions that we get to make, that nobody made them for, we don't know what our parents would have done or how, right? When my daughter says, when can I get my ears pierced? I say, when you're 12. She says, why? And I say, because that's how old I was. I mean, that's not all of it. It's what I really say is when you can take care of your ears when they get infected. But we have guidelines. People made those choices for us, and we have some idea. We have no idea how to figure out when to give our kids a phone. We don't really know historical data on that. So there's that whole layering of a phone, and then there's the whole layering in of access to social media. So let's look at some of our handouts.
Well, can I just say something here, sort of a plug to something that some of the parents have volunteered to do. So you might have seen, I think it was before the Hagim, that one of the community rabbis has this initiative. It's actually a national initiative about parents in each grade getting together and talking about what parents are doing as a grade regarding technology. And so different people volunteer to be, I guess, captains of the grade. And in the next couple weeks, there will be surveys going out. It's totally individualized by each grade, and people can participate how they want to. But it's not part of the school. It's just Hill and Torah parents getting together. I want to say it's not a school program. It's not a PTA program. It's really just parents talking about this topic and this being a really important topic. And so if people are interested in participating, great. If not, they don't have to. But the idea is that parents are going to, let's gather this information. Let's learn about what everyone's doing in their homes. Let's figure out if we want to have some grade rules and things like that, and things that would help us. So if you hear about this, and it just seemed really on point.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you hear about this in the next, no pressure, but because it is so difficult, and if there are some things that we want to talk about as a community and as a grade community, so more to come on that. And happy. The Gravers hosted this, of course they're like the technology couple, but they hosted this meeting a few weeks ago, but more to come, and if you want to get more involved, I'm sure you can talk to the Gravers.
Or you, or
me, or anyone, because it is so important, and it does help when it's not just the parents making the decision, but also positive factors in their social group and their group too. So.
Yeah. And there's no question that if there are a group of kids in the grade that don't have technology or that don't have certain levels of technology, that will make it easier. Because, right, everybody wants what their friends has, and everybody wants to be connected to their friends. And so if all the kids have this technology and you don't, you are by default left out of certain things. That's not a plug, a pro, or a con. It's just a reality of kind of what goes on. And so, yes, when you can get a whole cohort of people, then you're not left out, because lots of people have those mean parents who won't get them when they're in fourth grade. Okay, so this common sense census. So I will tell you guys that if there's one resource that I always steer people to around any sort of technology, it's a website called commonsensemedia.org. And this comes from them. They do a ton of research. They also rate movies and books and apps and sort of all things technology. And they'll have parent reviews and they'll have kid reviews. So it'll be, this movie, and parents say, so it's rated whatever. Parents say kids should be this old. Kids say kids should be this old, and they'll tell you why. So it can be a really good. It just gives you more information, and information is good, and as I said, it's a reliable source. So this came out this morning, and it's showing how much time kids are spending on technology. This is not including school or homework, right? This is just what they're doing, watching videos, talking to each other, experimenting, and all of those things. And it turns out that there was this fantasy that kids were going to spend a lot of time creating content online, and it appears that that is not the case. Less than 10% of time online is spent creating content. So you might have the kid who's not like that, but that's kind of it. So they can't all review toys, right? Yes. Yeah, I want the toy company to send me all those toys. I'm sure that you do. But one of the pieces on here that I think is really powerful is smartphone ownership, right? So by age 11, 53% of kids who were surveyed had a smartphone. That's a lot of smartphones. So 3 years ago, that was 32%. That's a really big change in those middle years. And it's just a piece of information that I wanted you to have. On the back are some where kids are spending time and what they're doing. And it's not terribly shocking if you have kids and they have access to devices, right? Tweens spend a ton of time watching stuff and some time what's the, I'm trying to figure out what the breeze, video chatting and gaming and things like that. So it's a piece for you to know, and then the time spent watching online videos, the drastic increase in amount of time, by percent, that kids are spending. And for tweens, it's still really, really YouTube. Okay. And then I put together this handy dandy, when do you get your child? Just to give you some thoughts. Just to give you some thoughts about what things to think about, right? Because I don't know about you, but sometimes things will happen, and I will have that moment where I go, oh no, I have no idea how to make this decision or what to say or whatever. And so it's really helpful for me to know where to go, to just, how do I think through this, right? It's great to have parents, other parents that you know maybe who have slightly older kids who've already gone through this, who you can call and say, what did you do when? But things to think about. So, before your kid gets a cell phone, are they responsible? You're giving them a rather valuable piece of technology. Do they lose things? If they lose everything already, you can be pretty much guaranteed that they're going to lose the phone. Right? Why would the phone be any different? On the other hand, do they need to be in touch for safety reasons? Right? As kids get older, they have more independence. And do you need to be able to call them to make arrangements? Do they need to be able to call you to tell you where they are, or what time they need to be picked up, or any of those things? So those are pieces to think about. Does having easy access to friends benefit them socially, right? Are they struggling with friendships and they need that to have more connection? Or are they struggling with friendships and they need to have breaks from that? So they're both valid things, but they're things to think about. Can they adhere to the limits that you set? I'm pretty sure none of them can. And then when it gets to social media, so as they get older, so it's interesting, when kids first ask you for a phone, it's fascinating to ask them why they want it. Anybody done that?
Yeah.
What do they say?
He says he needs to call me from places, but he doesn't go anywhere yet. He's going to need to call me.
Okay.
He loves you.
Right. But when you think about giving your kid a phone, like, what are the things that you're concerned about? It's not that, right? Usually when we think about a kid on a phone, we think about, like, people getting in touch with them and all sorts of things. It's really useful to ask them, well, why do you want it?
Because it's not really a phone. Like, you think like a phone is
never
like to
seen one.
call people and talk to them. It's not, it's a computer.
Well, it depends on what it is. If you get them
I don't
a
want a flip
phone,
phone.
Okay, let's not say flip phones.
a smartphone.
They're not asking for a smartphone because they want to use it as a phone. They want to use it as an iPad or a computer or whatever.
Right. But those are the good conversations to have. What do you want to use it for? Right? My son wants one so he can play games. Okay, that's useful to know, right? I can explain to him why I think he doesn't need to spend any more time playing games. But that's a conversation. That's helpful to understand what he wants it for.
But that also brings it back also to the same issue with adults and the phone. It's like your point is it's all in one. So, it's work, right? You can be on it doing work. It's your music. Mm-hmm. It's your news. It's everything in between. So.
Yep. It's tricky.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And talking about that and talking with and in front of your kids about those challenges is helpful. Right? Because they're looking for guidance on how to figure all of this out. Okay. Not too bad. All right. So parents, run back on my my whiteboard, the outline on page 3. So, role in guiding kids. So really important stuff is, what are your values around this and how do they guide your decisions? And can you articulate them? Anybody ever try to sit down and talk about what your values are with your partner vis-a-vis technology. What's important, what's not. It's really tricky, right? Because we don't even always even have the language. But in order to be able to have conversations with our kids around values and how we think about what we're going to allow them to do and not do and when, and then them to tell us why they think they should be allowed to do X, Y, or Z, we have to be able to put language to all of this. So it's much easier to start with another adult who, in theory, has better capacity at language than your kid. Give it a try. So one of the things that happens sometimes when we have these conversations is that we get really caught up in our own fear. So what are fears people have around kids and technology?
Addiction.
Addiction.
Some creepy man is gonna find my daughter and take her away.
Okay.
Really.
Okay. So someone is going to reach out to your child and get them away somewhere. Okay?
That they're looking at inappropriate things.
They're looking at inappropriate things. Okay. Right. So I think it's really important for us to be able to put our fears out on the table and also then to do a little research about how realistic those fears are or not. Right? Because that's hugely important. So for instance, 93% of child abduction is with somebody they already knew. So I'm not saying it never happens, but like the chances are relatively small. So we need to understand our fears. We need, I think, to do a little research and investigate how realistic that is. So I'm afraid about my kids and addiction. That's an important thing to know. What are those boundaries? They're now finally starting to come out with some research that gives us some guidelines on, where is that line of daily use that starts to become really problematic, right? So under 2 hours a day, not problematic. Over 5 hours a day, definitely problematic. 2 to 5, still kind of gray in there, right? And it probably depends on the person and what they're doing. But I really encourage us to think about what our fears are and then get educated about them. I firmly believe that no decision made out of fear is ever a good decision, right? Because we're not using our prefrontal cortex.
Nobody said cyberbullying. And
Cyberbullying.
I think that's become a more prevalent.
Yes. Yeah, because we've always had bullying, and so now we do bullying online. Yeah, and it absolutely is a concern. It's a concern for kids. Kids are worried about it. Kids see it. Nobody said sexting.
Well, it's under inappropriate content.
Inappropriate content. Okay. So there's two places where we see inappropriate content. One is pornography, right? And I'm going to do my blurb on pornography because it's super, super, super important. And the other is sexting, right? We must talk to our kids. I'll do my blurb on pornography right now. We must talk to our kids about pornography. The average age a kid sees pornography in this country online, when they're not looking for it, is 11.
Oh,
Yes. So we must have conversations with our kids about pornography. What it is, we don't need to go into detail, right? The first time you had the birds and the bees conversation, you did not go into detail. But pornography is people doing adult things. You can use whatever language you want to use. And the things that they're doing online on pornography are not normal, regular things. And the people who are in pornography are not normal bodies. We have a huge problem these days with kids comparing their own sexual activity with pornography. I don't know if anybody's looked at any pornography. I actually recommend that if your kids have seen it, you go online and look at some of it. It's really disturbing, but we need to see what our kids are seeing, right? So we need to talk to our kids about how unrealistic it is that they might come across it, that we're working really hard that they won't, but they might, and this is what we want them to do when they see it. Yeah.
Do you know anything about, is there anything known about how kids who are not specifically looking for it come across it? Like I just think, like I have an 11-year-old boy, and the only videos he watches on YouTube are Survivor episodes and sports. So like I don't know, you know, but I know YouTube will suggest things, and it takes you to like, is that where it's coming from, or other people sending it, or
all those advertisements on the sides,
Yeah.
you don't realize it, even on okay sites, if you accidentally click because you're like, oh my god, like crazy stuff shows up.
yeah.
Also, sometimes the commercials that show up on YouTube,
Like,
given
on
the
the
videos, are really not appropriate for kids. Like, especially this time of year, like all the horror film, like movie
Yeah.
previews. I was like,
I was thinking the same thing, inappropriate. I'm thinking also just more adult themed. That's not
Yeah,
necessarily,
not
just
yeah.
language or violence or whatever, just not appropriate for a young kid.
So, the recommendation is always that we watch things with our kids. That, I'm pretty sure, would mean that we had 48 hours for every 24 of theirs. But, look it over. It can be really, really useful. Yes,
Sometimes if you type in a word that's perfectly natural.
absolutely. You never know what's going to, right,
Blue,
right.
and you never know what's going to
Yeah, absolutely. So they're all different ways. So what I like to say is, we do everything we can to protect our kids, but one of the things we need to do to protect our kids is to explain to them what they're going to find in the world. And the other thing is, and this is we need to talk about kids about sexuality, is if we are the first ones to tell our kids about all of this, they will come to us when they find it and when they have questions. If we are not the first ones to tell them about it, they will not come to us, right? And we want them to come to us. So we want them to know that, oh, we're fine talking about all of this stuff, right? Do that at night after they've gone to bed. And then, yes, we can absolutely talk about all of these things, right? Because we want our kids to come and talk to us about everything, even though we really don't, but we do. We don't want to have the conversation, but we want them to have come to us, right? And both of those things can exist at the same time. So talking to our kids about technology and what they see on it and what their interests are and all of those things is huge. Just sit down next to them while they're on something and will you show me what you're doing? One of my very favorite exercises is who uses the apps their kids use? Yeah. So if you want to understand your kids' technology use, you need to be using the apps that they use. Your kids on YouTube, go on YouTube, right? They're probably on YouTube on your account anyway, because you can't have an account until you're 13, which it turns out it has a whole different history. It's not like somebody decided that content was inappropriate for under 13. It has to do with when you can give consent to be tracked or something like that. But you can look
all
at
that
this.
is just changing the year. I mean, your kids
Right.
are smart enough to be like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm now 16.
Right, now I can be 14 and now I can get on it. But you can go and look at their browsing history and you'll see what it is that they're watching, right? And every once in a while it's a really good idea to go and look at their browsing history and see what they're watching.
So to use the app, I don't even use the YouTube app, because online you can just look up YouTube. You don't
You
have
can.
to sign in. You don't have
True.
to be.
Yeah, but most kids often are on an app and have signed in
You
because
have to
then
sign into the app to be able to
Yeah.
Can you block
No.
it?
You don't have to sign in.
you don't have to.
Just get the app.
you can still see the history.
So you
You
still
can
have
see
to
the
sign in.
activity.
When you have it on your phone, it's connected usually to an account, a Gmail
Yeah.
account or whatever,
Oh,
Google
okay.
account.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Like when I open it on my phone, I see it suggests things based on what my kids were watching on the computer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, you can look at time watched on YouTube also.
Yeah, you can look at all sorts. There's a ton of information now that you can track about what your kids are doing. You just have to get a little curious. And it can be really interesting. And when it comes, I think, from curiosity and not from any place else, I think it can be really useful, right? Well, what do you like? Sometimes my kids will be giggling hysterically, and I'll say, show me what you're looking at. What's so funny? Sometimes it's so silly that I can't even speak, right? But sometimes it really is funny. Or they'll say, well, this is funny because this person told me this during the day, and, it's all part of their world, and it's a way of being into their world. Kids absolutely want their parents to know and understand and be able to help them with technology. It shows up everywhere in all of the research. It's part of the letter that I recommended that, people with slightly older kids want guidance. They won't tell us that, right? But they will deny it with every ounce of their being.
Totally.
However, kids want guidance. Kids know when they're in over their heads. And they want us to know and they want us to understand. And the only way for us to know and understand is to be in there doing it. Right? So my daughter, for weeks, could not get off Roblox. It was making me crazy, but I was preparing for one of these, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to download the app. So I downloaded the app, and I set my timer for 15 minutes, and I would swear to you that I was on it for 3 minutes. Right? I was completely lost in this game. Well, it gave me a much greater understanding of what happens for her when she's in the middle of a game, and I say to her, it's time to get off, and she looks up like, what are you talking about? Because for me, 15 minutes felt like 3 minutes. I can only imagine what it's like for her, right? So get on the social media that your kids are using. It will be helpful. It connects you to their world. This is looking here like, I don't think I want to go there. But, also ask them to show you. Show me what you're watching. Show me what you're doing. You got to get them in the right mood, of course, before they'll do that. But it's still a good one. Okay, I'm on page 4. So some of the stuff we talked about, setting boundaries when they cannot, I think I've pretty much beaten that horse until it's gone. Teaching socialization skills. So this is a huge one. Who got taught when they were a kid how to answer the phone and how to shake hands with people? Who teaches their kids how to do those things? Like, it's on the list of things that you need to teach your kids, right? Most of us are not teaching our kids, it turns out, how to answer the phone, which is a problem because we actually want them to answer the phone when we call. And so it turns out, right, because here's one of the things. We all learned how to answer the phone by listening to our parents answer the phone. How often do your kids hear you answer the phone?
Rarely.
Right? Now,
not only answer the phone, but my 14-year-old doesn't even know how to speak into the phone. She was on her cell phone this morning like this, and she couldn't hear. And I was like, you have to put it next to her. She's 14. She did
right. So there are all sorts of things that, I remember my kids picking up the phone and trying to pick the regular phone, and they couldn't figure out why they couldn't see the person. Right? Because they had really only ever been on FaceTime. So there's a lot of etiquette that we need to teach kids and help kids figure out, right? What's okay when you're texting somebody? What are okay words to use? What aren't okay words to use? What are okay words to use when your grandmother is around? And okay words to use when it's just your friends. Like, how to make those decisions. What information is it okay to share online with your friend, and what really needs to be a face-to-face conversation? Those are hard, right? The average kid is now breaking up with each other online. So much easier, right? Yeah. I don't have to deal with their hurt face and their tears and their all of those things. But, do we really want to live in a world where that's how people interact with each other? So we can empathize with their desire to do that, and we can talk to them about, well, what did they think it would be like? What are they worried about? What would they like to happen if somebody were doing that with them? We can role model with them. We can do all of those things to help give them more skills. So the whole issue of bullying, right? What does it look like online? What did you see that was going on online that made you uncomfortable? Right? How did you know it wasn't okay? Was there someplace in your body that you felt it? Was that what's going on? How did you know that didn't feel okay? Well, what do you think wasn't okay about it? right? Those are the conversations that we need to have with our kids. So schools are doing some about being upstanders. And we can, it's also really helpful to know like what your school's doing so that you can sort of echo it at home, right? So I don't know what kinds of curriculums you guys are using.
Yeah, whenever we do any of that stuff, almost always we send home notes to the parents saying, this is what was discussed in advisory, this is what was discussed in the class, please reinforce it. So it gives like that language.
Yeah. So I find
Also, there's a game on one of the, the grade pages for like the apps that they have on the website. There's this game called Interland. Have you ever seen it? Those are the games those are the choices that the kids can play with. So, good job. Don't put more stuff on it. Whatever's there, it's fine. But there's this game called Interland, and it's all about like online safety, and they have to like be kind to people. On the Hillsborough website. It's for sure on the second grade page, and it's also on the fourth grade page. But like they have to answer questions about being like what's good choices and like teaching them vocabulary about cyber safety. And the way that you play the game is like there's a person being a bully. Oh, it's not always. It's just like bullying. Also, there's a bunch of different lands and things, and there's like a bully being mean. And so instead of shooting, you give hearts to people, but it's essentially you're shooting a heart at them, so it's like still a shooting game, but it's a heart. But it's like a really cute game, and there's also like this. So like, my second grader who doesn't really go online independently still has this awareness of it, and it has this vocabulary, so it's actually.
Well, the younger kids, when they have computers, I don't know exactly offhand what ages they do what, but part of what they do in the computers in the younger ages is like, I think it's called digital literacy, and they play these sort of online games which teach online behavior skills. So it's like fun and it's engaging, but they're hopefully learning some of this along the way.
And he's like, can you help me read this word? I'm like, what is it? He's like, cyberbullying. I'm like, okay.
Just where did you find this?
Yeah, what second grade did you talk about?
If you go to academics, and then
on the Hillsborough
on the Hillsborough website, and you go into academics, there's a page by grade, which by fourth grade.
The kids know how to get there because when they go into the computer, when they go on the computers, teacher says go into there's like an area for students to get access student links, so they all know how to get there.
Sure, yeah.
And then each grade has there's like a typing, they learn typing, so there's like a typing game, so yeah, I guess if you're looking, it's a good idea if you're looking for educational type activities for the kids to do. That's all the kosher things are on there. They're gonna like it much more than you two. You'll see.
Okay, so let me get through like two more things and then we'll do questions and conversation. So safety, we need to help kids realize what's unsafe. Like we can't just be afraid of it, we need to help them recognize what's not safe online. And that comes a lot with conversations. When we're first allowing our kids to be online in any sort of setting, are we sitting with them the first few times to see what's happening or what's going on? One of the recommendations is, that you check what's going on with your kids and that your kids know that you will do that. You will occasionally take their electronics and look and see. And it's all about helping to protect them, right? It's not that you don't trust them. It's that it's your job as a parent to help protect them, and this is part of that, right? And it's part of what's important about, which is why I like this idea of a family phone contract, right? And the family phone contract is something you can create together. You don't have to create it and hand it to your kid and be like, sign this or you don't get the phone, right? What do we think as a family our family rules should be around phones? There can be parent rules about phones too. So it'll give you different topics to help you have those conversations. When can you use it? Who can you have as contacts? This is what we're going to do to keep you safe. Don't share information online. They're good basics for younger kids. Don't say anything online that you wouldn't say to somebody in person, right? Don't ever friend somebody or talk to people that you don't actually know. So we start that stuff early and then we keep going with it. So one of the things that I didn't talk about in terms of, so I did sexuality and relationships. Let me do a minute on sexting. You might not be familiar with the concept, but you probably have read about it, right? Sending nude photos. It starts early, and kids do not it's budding sexuality, right? It's exploring your sexuality. And they do everything online, so why wouldn't they explore their sexuality online? It makes us a little heebie-jeebie-ish, but that's their world. And so helping kids understand the consequences of sending inappropriate photos of themselves. Also helping kids know what to do when people are asking them for inappropriate photos, right? Because kids can really badger and bully other kids into doing that. And so and this is all that talking and listening with your kids so that when these situations happen, they come and they talk to us because they know that externally we will not lose it. Internally, we can lose it all we need to. Right? And maybe we have to take a little walk around the house before we can actually have the conversation. But we want our kids to know that no matter what happens, we've got their backs. And it's a very delicate balance. Right? Kids are gonna mess up. That's how they develop their prefrontal cortex. That's how we all did. We learn stuff because we messed up. And they will do the same thing. But we want them to understand that there are laws in this state about owning photos of underage people who are naked. And it's not legal. Right? And so I've given you some resources for talking to your kids about it and what is recommended. Right? It's the one thing that they recommend that as soon as you get or see, you delete. Other things, bullying, they say screenshot it, have evidence, things like that. Sexting, delete immediately. Around self-regulation, the one thing I realized I haven't talked about is sleep. So it turns out that there is a huge problem with our young people and the amount of sleep that they get. Because if you are spending 7 hours and 22 minutes online that doesn't include schoolwork, or time in school.
Or being in school.
There's not enough time in there to sleep, right? And so this is one of the huge issues. And the most consistent message I hear or read anywhere is no electronics in the bedroom after whatever hour. Like, you would mean no electronics in the bedroom, period, or no electronics after a certain hour, but everything I read talks about how incredibly important it is. Look, the later it gets, the harder it is for us to make reasoned decisions. The harder it is for our kids to make reasoned decisions. Anybody else have children that tend to melt down the closer it gets to bedtime, no matter how old they are? And so your ability to turn it off, anybody else somehow found themselves on their phones or other electronic devices past the time that they thought that they would be on said phone or electronic device? Right? These are powerful machines. They've got a lot of technology behind them that's trying to get you to stay on them. And so our kids need us to set those boundaries. There are kids waking up in the middle of the night to check their phones.
No.
That does not lead to good sleep hygiene. Right? And so that's the one thing that I can most consistently see, hear, and read, is that's a really clear boundary. Okay. Questions? Thoughts? I've thrown a ridiculous amount of information at you there. 9:15. All right. So while you're thinking, you can do the lovely evaluation. I have extra pens. Usually people have pens, but I also have them. And then I'm also going to ask you guys we're going to do a little round robin on something that you're going to take away. So it means pens. You can have your own pens. It's the gray sheet. Is that really pretty gray? None of the
Oh, February. Sorry, I was trying to-
Anybody else need a pen? We're good. Okay, so I'm now going to ask you to multitask, even though it turns out there is no such thing as multitasking. It's just your brain going from one thing to the other. So I'm just going to go around the circle and ask people to share something that they'll take with them from tonight. Something you'll think about, something you'll share with somebody, something that maybe stuck with you. So I'll pick on Rabbit because you're on my left.
I want to think about, instead of just telling my kids what they can or can't do, try to make it more of a conversation and discuss the issue and try to come up with something together.
Yeah, I think just to follow up to that, I think what I found interesting was the idea that sort of broaching the subject of things that your kids haven't seen yet before they see it. It makes a lot of sense. I just hadn't thought about it. And we have younger kids, so they haven't, like, at this point, if you like the YouTube or something, like my kids are doing iTalong, it's about all they're doing on their Chromebook at this point. So, we're before all that. So starting to think about those conversations before is helpful.
Thanks.
Similar to what I said before, is that what I'm going to think about is our devices as adults being a role model to our kids. Again, I'm not always on it for social media. The truth is, I don't really go on social media that much, but I am on the phone a lot on again work and texting and all this kind of stuff. So trying to and reading the news and things of that nature, which are all innocent and nice, but again, around the kids, they see that and ignoring them or not listening to them, being more attentive to that.
And also verbalizing what you're doing, right? So that they know, I need to check this for work.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks.
Those topics that I wish to not discuss are perhaps the most important.
Don't you hate that?
And realizing that they are involved in those topics with others, so I should be involved in those topics perhaps first.
I think I'm going to add myself to the contract, and my phone's going to need to go away during the times that.
Yeah. I know it's so hard.
Yeah.
It really is.
But if they're all home with me,
Because once you do it, we started to do that about a year ago or so. And once you do it, it's like so much better.
Yeah.
It really has a
Listen to
marked
them, yeah.
difference at night. Like, yeah.
You're talking about the parents. You're saying putting
Parents putting it away.
putting your phone away.
Putting your phone away, yeah. Yeah, it's like the focus project from last year where they talked about that and we started doing it. And I think it's amazing because they were talking about in that program how bedtime is like one of the most crucial times for kids. And so putting away your phone specifically around dinner time, bedtime is so important because your kids really need your attention. And it's, we can see it, just observe it.
There's such a fine line. I think of how I was when I was a teenager and all the ridiculous things I did, and I still want my daughter to do those ridiculous things, but I don't want it to be like it's not coming back to bite me because there were no cell phones back then. But I don't want it to come back to bite her because there are cell phones.
Yeah. And we don't get to make that choice. Yeah. Thanks.
I think I'm going to play that game with my daughter where she talks for a minute and I listen and then I'm going to ask her how she felt after. And I'm going to tell her that I'm guilty of not listening and that I want to listen more is what she has to say.
Yeah. This is something that I'm trying to grow at or be better at. Thanks.
I think I'm going to start spending more time on my phone using like Minecraft and Discord and the places where my kids are spending a lot of time.
Yes. Thanks.
What is Discord?
I have coworkers on that.
It's a game?
No,
social media.
It's conversations
Gamers.
about millions of topics, you know, to your point of like kids who don't live near people who are interested in them.
Finding
My
the,
daughter didn't have any peers with similar interests at school, but she has a whole community of people who share her interests on Discord.
It's so interesting.
You know?
So I heard that it's really just about gamers, but it's interesting how
It
it's being
started as
used.
a gaming thing,
in
but
so
now
many-
she's in all
yeah.
these musical theater conversations.
Wow, interesting.
and
there's an article yesterday in Wall Street Journal about that.
Oh, yeah.
So about kids who have trouble finding peers, you know, and then online they actually, it's very it could be a positive social force.
yeah, which you addressed, and that's
Yeah.
why I got my daughter a phone. Because she could be included in online what she wasn't necessarily included in IRL. So yeah, it's hard
Yeah.
for that in real life.
Yes, IRL in real life. Can we all listen? Thanks.
Coming up with a plan with my husband and discussing the different items that we discussed tonight to make sure that we're all on the same page in our house.
Or at least facing the same direction. Thanks.
I think a couple of things. One is like a follow-up on Jessica's comment, but also what you said, how we should be the first ones to talk to them about those topics. I almost feel like as a grade we need to figure out when that's going to happen, because as soon as one of us do, they're all going to go into school the next day, and then Dad'll be the first person that talks to them about it.
Remember, a lot of kids have older siblings.
That's true too. So we're screwed right.
That's how I learned about it all.
Well, you just need one kid on the bus.
Yeah, I was
But-
that kid on the bus.
Well, you should know in Hilltop, for those of you kids who are not yet in middle school, just briefly, in 5th grade we start with what's called Family Life. Well, it's advisory and there's all series of programs, and you start with this thing called Family Life, which is starting that puberty conversation and all that. And we always let parents know in advance, we're going to be doing this, if you want to talk to them first. And
It was
then
the
we
one
said,
night I was out of town.
Can you just address, do you talk, I know you talk about your body and like your own self and your own development, but is there any conversation? I know it's like within the, appropriate conversation of a Jewish Orthodox family, but like, is there talk about sex and sexting?
for sure, as they get older. So that's not all in 5th grade. It's great. So we do it every year, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and it's like layered. Yeah, so yes.
But if a child does ask
Right,
in
that's
5th
fine,
grade,
yeah.
it is addressed.
Yes, and we put that in. Yes, but that's not necessarily part of the curriculum. But we tell the parents, in advance. This is what we're going to talk about. This may come up, So there's like full disclosure. Because, like you say, there's going to be kids who know already in this, and yeah.
But again, if the first place the kid hears about it is from you, they're going to come back to you. If the first place they hear about it is at school, they aren't necessarily as likely to come back to you first thing. That's just how it
We
works.
did a great program a bunch of years ago with a woman,
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Yocheved Debo, and she also wrote a great book. And when we send out those things, we send it out, and I'm happy to share with you also. We have it on our school YouTube. Like we did a video of that talk about, she wrote a book, How to Talk to Your
Orthodox teens about
Children About Intimacy and Sexuality, and it's like a guide for Orthodox parents. And she's a nurse and an educator, or like really knows her stuff on all levels. And it's great, and it's really helpful guide. She has like a cheat sheet there and the whole thing. So it's a great book, and it's not just about the talk. It's like it starts really young and body image and all kinds of
It's
stuff.
no one talk.
Yeah.
There are lots of little talks.
Yeah. So it's a really good book. You can get it on Amazon, Yocheved Debo, and it's great. And you could go online to the Hillel Torah YouTube, and you could watch it or listen to it in the car.
It's still on there. It's like an hour and 10 minutes, but it is really worth listening, and I've rewatched it because I needed help.
The one major line that I remember from her was she said, if you set up the lens for your children to see things through, they will see it through your lens. And if you don't, they will come from a different lens that's not yours. And we want to set up that lens.
Interesting.
So again, right, you're the first one having the conversation. Yeah. Okay, I just want to be able to hear from everybody.
Okay, so 2 things. The first one was the brain development of like the prefrontal cortex. Because I feel like there's so many things that, you know, we want to teach our kids and try to teach our kids. And I feel like I never really thought about like how to deal with mistakes that you're making. Like, because when I do spill the milk in the morning when we're getting out of the house, I get very annoyed. And I don't. Yeah. So.
And I'm not the self I'd like to be, is kind of what I usually say.
Right. So I think it's hard to remind yourself in like the daily routine of life that like you have all these littles watching you. So I think I'm just gonna try. I keep trying, but that's something I'm gonna still work on.
But we also go back and we say to our kids, you know, that the way that I responded this morning to that, that's really not the way I'd like to be able to respond. I'm going to try to do X on the front end.
Okay, that makes me feel better.
I know, right? Yeah.
And then also, I just want to say, this year we started charging our my own children. They're little, so they don't have their own phones. But my husband and I charge our phones during dinner, and we actually happen to have a 14-year-old boarder living with us this year, and she's always on her phone. And the rule extends to her, and it's crazy how much she talks during dinner because she does not have her phone. So like, and I feel like that's important because she doesn't have her parents there. Like, not that we're her parents, but we're her sounding board. And if we didn't have that rule, I don't think she would tell anyone about her day. So I like that putting it away rule.
Great, thank you.
This has been very eye-opening to me. I think I've not really thought through very much of this, and I've realized I'm also going to be spending a lot more time learning about some of these apps and capabilities of phones and things, because I think that I am a novice and very naive about a lot of this. So it's all been eye-opening to me.
And you don't have to learn it all on your own. It's often useful to like find a high schooler who knows it and who will be happy to show you.
And my oldest is in second, so we're just like...
So you've got time, but yeah, it's a nice way to learn it. It's because they're enthusiastic about it. They'll show you all the really cool things.
We just learned about TikTok because of this 14-year-old.
Oh yeah, that's the hot thing.
All about TikTok.
Yeah. Okay. Just want to finish up.
Just to agree with you that, like, you know, I think I kind of shut down some of it and pretended that it's not coming into my face, and I need to just be paying more attention and be more aware of what's out there and what I should be doing in the close future, because that's all my daughter talks about is who has a cell phone in her class, and when am I getting a cell phone, and when am I getting a cell phone.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, and I know, and my younger kids are like, well, this one has a phone on the bus, and this one has a phone on the bus, and we're all sitting with...
They don't all have, unfortunately.
Right.
I'll tell you right away.
No, but there's
There may be some who do,
There's a
but-
couple, but I'm saying, like, even today, my second grader's like, well, I sat with this boy on bus because he has a cell phone, who's a fourth grader.
Right.
So, you know, like,
Right.
it's...
Yeah, it's their world.
Yeah.
They don't know a world without it.
No, they don't. They don't.
So and we get to raise them. You know, that's this whole idea of that they're digital natives, and we are the immigrants. Yeah.
Really what everyone was saying, but the open conversation of just being open with your children. And we have teenagers and young ones, and we have found that just having the conversation of come to us, and we also actually just told our teenagers that we're going to be able to take your phone whenever we want to check what you're doing. And they were like freaking out. I'm like, nothing to freak out about because you're not doing anything bad on your phone. I like that idea.
But yeah, and to help them understand that while it may not feel like you're trying to be protective of them, that's
Right.
what it is. And they will be relieved.
Yes.
They will never tell you.
It really resonated with me when you said you had set the timer for yourself for 15 minutes and play that game. You said it felt so short, and I mean, I could go down an Instagram hole for like 40 minutes so easily, but like seeing that from my kid's perspective of like, it's been 15 minutes and why is it so hard for you to get off Subway Surfer? It's the dumbest thing ever. But like, I don't know, I know there's time setting apps and like, maybe like that will help because setting the phone timer doesn't work, they know how to turn it off and, you know, but also like, it is short and then even just talking about how it feels short and really that connected to me because it feels short for me too and I can waste a lot of time on social media.
I would say I discovered a few months ago the screen time feature in the iPhone, like, I don't know, whatever it is. It's amazing. No, you could set limits for yourself if you want, but also, especially for your kids, limits altogether, times that it turns off at, you know, either at night or whenever you want to set it for, and limits on certain apps. That was the only way I found to like get some control. And actually, surprisingly, one of my kids, one was like rebelling with it, but one of them was like, did not rebel at all, and I was shocked, and I think they were like kind of relieved, like, oh, finally, like, because they couldn't stop.
Right.
So it was like giving them like, you know, okay, I guess I can't, and like they were secretly okay with it.
We have to
So it's a really
normalize
cool
how-
feature.
We have to normalize how hard it is, right? That there's nothing wrong with you for not being able to get off of it, but we understand that you can't, and that's our job.
I think the idea of watching what your kids are watching, my kids are on screens and I have stuff to do. And so, I don't want to listen to Ryan review more toys, okay? Like, I really can't. And I make him go into a different room. I'm like, I don't want to listen to this. Or, I mean, that's what my 4-year-old's watching. And then my other kid's like, I'm not paying attention to what they're watching because I need to get done what I have to get done. So, like, if I'm watching with them, how am I going to get done what I need to get done? So I feel like that's kind of tricky.
Yeah, and I'm just saying that's what people are, that's what the instruction is. I'm not saying that that's realistic.
No, but I think it's really important. You know, also how quickly they are changing the shows, right? Like they could watch something for 5 minutes and then something for 3 minutes, and then it's just this constant switching, which is kind of crazy to even get a handle of like, what are you actually watching? And then in regards to sleep, I will say I feel like my kids were relatively early risers. And as someone who, I'm an early riser, like whether I'm at the gym or working out or wherever I am at that hour, like I don't want to deal with my kids at that hour because I need that time for myself. And I can for sure my husband does not want to deal with them at that hour. And so usually they have a screen. And so we set a time of like, okay, you can be on a screen when you wake up, but at 6:50, that screen is off. And then we have to have breakfast, get ready for school, and be out. So it became so impossible at 6:50 to turn those screens off that the mornings were just becoming completely out of hand. So we decided, that's it, no more screens in the morning. Like, we will deal. They deal with it on Shabbat. They can deal with it. They'll figure out what to do with themselves.
But they go through withdrawal.
Yes, they do. But they're sleeping longer.
Oh.
Like, if someone wakes up to go to the bathroom, they go back to bed.
Instead of one.
Because they know there's nothing else for them to do. So in that regard, it's been really, really helpful.
So I want to thank everybody for being here, for sharing your ideas, your thoughts, for being open. JCFS continues to be here around all of these issues, and you have lots and lots of resources.
So before we go, just a huge thank you to Tracy and to JCFS. As you said, you really did cover a tremendous amount, but you also gave us a lot of resources to continue to pursue. A huge thank you to the PTA for sponsoring this evening and being so supportive of working hand in hand with all these sort of programs as a school. As I mentioned, I think in one of those letters, it's not only about academic progress for students, that's obviously one piece of our kids, but so much is about their emotional and social and personal development as human beings. And to that degree, we work not only in school, but also with you as parents to try to work on programs together. A huge thank you finally to Leah and Josh for hosting and putting out this beautiful spread. I enjoyed. Thank you so much. And finally, if anyone has any other questions for me or anyone else in school, I saw Mrs. Pinchot was here. She's a 5th grade teacher and advisor. Other people I know in school wanted to come but couldn't make it. But we're very invested in working together with parents. So if anyone has questions or follow-up for me or for any of the other staff, please let me know. We're always happy to discuss these issues or even advice or point you in a certain direction, things like that. We're here as a resource. So thank you again.